The doctor said she couldn't hear me, but she smiled when I spoke. Those words still echo in my head, like a soft whisper I can't forget. I never believed in miracles. Not really. I always thought life was just what it was: you're born, you live, and then one day, it ends. But that night, standing beside her hospital bed, something inside me changed forever. My grandmother wasn't just the woman who raised me, she was my whole world. After my mother died, she became everything: my teacher, my home, my safe place. Her hands were always warm, always gentle. She had this way of smiling through pain, like she knew that love was stronger than anything else. But seeing her lying there, motionless, with all those machines breathing for her, I couldn't recognize the woman who once danced barefoot in the kitchen while cooking Sunday rice. The doctors said she'd been unconscious for days, that she was slipping away. They spoke softly, like death was waiting right outside the door, listening. I remember their faces, kind but distant, as if they'd already given up hope. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand, trying to ignore how cold her fingers felt. The steady beep of the monitor was the only proof that she was still here. I whispered her name. Nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the slow, mechanical rhythm of a heart trying to hold on. I told her about the weather that day, about how the rain had stopped just as the sun came out, the kind of thing she used to love, those quiet, golden evenings where the world felt peaceful. My voice trembled, but I kept talking, even though the nurses said she couldn't hear me. And then I said, "It's okay to rest now. I love you." That's when it happened. A single tear slipped down her cheek. It was so faint, I thought maybe I imagined it. But then, she smiled. Just barely. A small, fragile curve of her lips, but it was real. My breath caught. I called for the nurse, my voice breaking. But deep down, I already knew. That smile wasn't for them. It was for me. It was her way of saying goodbye. The heart monitor beeped one last time, long and steady. The sound that follows you, even after the room goes quiet. I sat there, still holding her hand, tears running down my face. And for the first time in my life, I believed, not in miracles that defy death, but in love that lives beyond it. Because I knew, in that moment, that she heard me. Somehow, through the noise of machines and the fading light of her soul, she heard me. And she waited, just long enough to let me know that love, even in silence, always finds a way to speak back. My name is Daniel. When I was 8 years old, my world shattered in an instant. One minute, I was sitting in the back seat of my mother's car, humming along to the radio. The next, everything went dark, the sound of metal, glass, and screams fading into silence. They told me later that she died instantly, that she didn't feel a thing. But that didn't make it easier. For a long time, it felt like the world had stopped spinning, like time itself had frozen in that one awful moment. After the funeral, everyone said the same things: "She's in a better place, you'll be okay, you're so strong." But I wasn't strong. I was a scared little boy clutching a photograph of my mother, trying to remember the sound of her voice. The house felt too big, too empty. Every room echoed with memories I wasn't ready to face. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life lost inside that silence. Then Grandma came. She didn't cry when she saw me. She just knelt down, looked me in the eye, and took my hand. "As long as I'm here," she whispered, "you'll never be alone." And somehow, I believed her. Maybe it was the way her voice didn't shake, or the way her hands felt steady and sure, warm, like sunlight breaking through a storm. From that day on, she kept that promise. She became my everything. My mornings began with her gentle humming from the kitchen, the smell of fried eggs and cocoa filling the house. She'd wear her old floral apron, the one she said made her feel like her own mother, and she'd hum gospel songs as she flipped pancakes that always came out in odd shapes. I'd sit at the table, swinging my legs, waiting for her to say, "You better eat that fast before it runs away." I used to laugh so hard, milk would spill from my nose. She taught me things I never knew I needed to learn. How to cook rice without burning it, how to fold clothes neatly, how to pray before bed even on the nights when I didn't feel like it. Gratitude, she'd say, isn't just for the good days. It's for the hard ones too. She showed me how to plant tomatoes in the backyard, how to listen to the rain and find peace in its rhythm. Every lesson was small, but together, they built me back piece by piece. And it wasn't just lessons, she taught me how to laugh again. How to dance around the kitchen while the stew simmered, how to make silly faces when life felt too heavy. On Saturdays, we'd sit by the radio, listening to old records while she braided my hair, not because it needed it, but because she said it reminded her of taking care of my mother when she was a little girl. I'd listen quietly, pretending not to notice the tears that sometimes glistened in her eyes when she spoke about Mom. She never let me see her break. Even when she was tired, even when her hands trembled, she smiled through it all. "We can't choose what happens to us, Danny," she'd say, "but we can choose what happens in us." Those words became my compass. Whenever school felt too hard, or the nights grew too lonely, I remembered her voice, calm, strong, full of love that never wavered. To me, Grandma wasn't just family. She was home. Not the kind of home made of bricks and walls, but the kind built from love, steady, unshakable, real. She filled every empty space my mother's death had left behind. And in doing so, she gave me more than comfort. She gave me hope. As I grew older, I began to see how much she had sacrificed for me. She'd skip meals just to make sure I had enough to eat. She'd stay up late sewing my torn school uniform because we couldn't afford a new one. But she never complained, never once said she was tired. Instead, she'd smile and say, "You're my purpose, Daniel. God sent you to keep me young." Every birthday, she baked the same vanilla cake, slightly lopsided, with uneven frosting and too many candles. But it was perfect because she made it with her hands, and her hands carried love in every motion. And every night, before bed, she'd check on me, just like when I was a child. She'd whisper, "Good night, my boy. Tomorrow will be better." And somehow, it always was. She was the reason I learned to believe again, not in luck, not in miracles, but in love that stays even when life falls apart. Grandma didn't just raise me, she rebuilt me. And as I stood in that hospital years later, holding her hand and watching her fade, all I could think about was that promise she made long ago. "As long as I'm here, you'll never be alone." And she kept that promise, every single day of her life. Even when I grew up and finally moved out of her house, Grandma never stopped being a part of my life. I might have been living in the city, chasing deadlines and trying to build a future, but every Sunday at exactly 6 o'clock, I'd call her. It became our little ritual, something constant in a world that seemed to change too fast. She'd always answer on the first ring, her voice soft and warm, like a blanket after a long day. "Danny boy," she'd say, using that nickname she'd given me when I was small. "Have you eaten? You sound tired." I'd laugh and tell her I was fine, that I'd cooked something or ordered takeout. She never believed me. You young people think noodles count as dinner," she'd joke, and I could almost see the playful frown on her face. Then, without fail, she'd ask the same question, "So, have you met someone special yet?" I'd roll my eyes, even though she couldn't see it, and tease her. "You just want great-grandkids, don't you?" That always made her laugh. That soft, raspy laugh that seemed to fill not just the room, but my whole chest. It was the kind of laugh that could make even the worst day feel lighter. Sometimes, she'd laugh so hard she'd start coughing, and I'd tell her to take it easy. She'd just wave it off and say, "Ah, let an old woman laugh. It keeps my heart young." Those calls were the highlight of my week. I could talk to her about anything, work, friends, life, and she'd listen, really listen, the way only she knew how. She never interrupted, never rushed me. When she gave advice, it wasn't with big, fancy words. It was simple, real, full of quiet wisdom. Don't chase what shines, she'd say, chase what stays. I didn't always understand what she meant back then, but her words stuck with me, like small pieces of truth that only made sense as I grew older. I'd visit her whenever I could, not as often as I should have, if I'm being honest. Life got busy. I told myself I'd go next weekend, then next month, then after the next project. She never complained, though. Whenever I did show up, she acted like no time had passed at all. She'd make her famous stew, hum to the radio, and tell me I looked too thin. She'd hug me tight, her hands trembling slightly, and for a few moments, I'd feel like that 8-year-old boy again, safe, loved, home. But time has a cruel way of moving on without asking permission. One Sunday, I called, and she didn't pick up. I figured maybe she was asleep or out in the garden, so I tried again later. Still no answer. I left a message, half joking, half worried, "Don't tell me you've finally gotten tired of my stories." I didn't hear back that night. Or the next. When she finally called 3 days later, her voice sounded weaker. "Sorry, Danny boy," she said, almost whispering. "I've been a bit under the weather." I asked if she'd seen a doctor, and she brushed it off, the way she always did. "It's just a little cold. I'll be fine." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. So I let it go, promising to visit soon. But soon turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The Sunday calls continued, but they grew shorter. She'd sound more tired each time, her laugh softer, her pauses longer. Sometimes she'd forget mid-sentence what she was saying, and I'd have to gently remind her. I told myself it was just age catching up, nothing serious. We all tell ourselves that when we're too afraid to face the truth. Then one day, the calls stopped completely. I dialed her number over and over, and every time, the line just rang and rang. The silence on the other end felt heavier than any noise I'd ever heard. That's when the worry really set in, that cold, creeping kind of fear that starts in your stomach and climbs up your chest until it's all you can feel. I remember sitting there, staring at my phone, realizing how something that had once been so constant, her voice, her laugh, her warmth, could suddenly vanish like smoke. It hit me that I hadn't just missed a call. I had missed time I could never get back. That was when I decided I had to go see her. I didn't care about work, or deadlines, or the excuses I'd been hiding behind. I just knew, deep down, that something was wrong. And for the first time in years, I was scared to find out what. I got the call from the hospital on a rainy Thursday. The sky was gray, and the world outside my window felt heavy, like it already knew what was coming. I remember staring at my phone as it rang, that strange gut feeling twisting inside me. When I picked up, a nurse's voice came through, calm but trembling, like she was trying to sound professional while hiding the weight of what she had to say. "Mr. Daniels," she said softly, "it's your grandmother. She's not responding. You should come quickly." For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My mind just went blank. The words didn't feel real. "She's not responding." They echoed in my head, louder than the rain hitting the glass. I grabbed my keys and ran out the door, barely remembering to lock it behind me. The drive to the hospital felt endless. The wipers moved back and forth in a frantic rhythm, matching the pounding of my heart. Every red light felt like a personal punishment. I kept whispering, "Please, just let her hold on. I'm coming, Grandma, please wait." By the time I reached the hospital, my hands were shaking so badly I could hardly sign the visitor sheet. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and something else, something colder, something that felt like fear. Nurses moved quietly, their faces tired, their eyes avoiding mine. I followed one down a narrow corridor, the sound of my shoes echoing off the linoleum floor. The closer we got, the heavier everything felt. It was like the air itself was warning me to prepare. When I entered her room, I froze. She looked smaller than I remembered. My strong, laughing, stubborn grandmother, the woman who could carry 2 grocery bags in each hand and still scold me for not wearing a jacket, now lay still beneath a thin white sheet. Her skin was pale, her lips slightly parted, and her gray hair was tucked neatly against the pillow. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room, a soft, mechanical reminder that she was still fighting. I stood there, not knowing what to do. The doctor came in, a tall man with kind eyes and a voice that tried to sound gentle. He looked at me and sighed, the way people do when there's nothing good left to say. "She might not hear you now," he said quietly, adjusting the foredrip. His words hung in the air like smoke. I nodded, but inside, I was screaming. Because I knew Grandma. I knew she always heard me, even when I didn't speak. She could always tell when something was wrong just by the way I sighed or the way I avoided her eyes. When I was a teenager and came home after a bad day, she'd just look at me and say, "All right, tell me what happened," before I even opened my mouth. When I lied about being fine, she'd smile and hand me a plate of food. "Eat first," she'd say. "We'll talk after." And somehow, by the end of dinner, I always ended up crying into her shoulder. So no, I didn't believe the doctor. She could hear me. I was sure of it. I walked to her bedside and took her hand. It felt cold, too cold. I squeezed it gently, hoping for the slightest sign of life, some movement, anything. Her skin was fragile, almost translucent, and I could see the faint blue of her veins beneath it. My throat tightened. "Hey, Grandma," I whispered, forcing a smile she couldn't see. "It's me. Your Danny boy." I started talking, just like I always did on Sundays. I told her about work, about the neighbors who still couldn't parallel park, about the weather, anything to fill the silence. I talked and talked, pretending that at any moment, she'd wake up, roll her eyes, and say, "You talk too much, boy." But she didn't. Her chest rose and fell slowly, the only movement in the room. The monitor beeped in a slow, steady rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat, steady, but fading. The nurse adjusted something on the side of the bed and gave me a small, pitying look before stepping out to give me privacy. And that's when the weight of it hit me. The helplessness. The fear. The realization that all the things I thought I'd have time to say, I might never get to say them at all. I leaned closer, my voice breaking. "You can hear me, can't you? You always do." My words came out shaky, desperate. "Please, Grandma. Don't leave yet. Just stay a little longer." And in that small, quiet room, surrounded by machines and the smell of rain from the open window, I felt the world hold its breath. I didn't know if she could hear me. But I spoke anyway. Because love doesn't need proof. It just needs to be spoken, even when the only sound left in the room is the steady beat of a heart that's fighting not to stop. I sat beside her bed and took her hand, still warm, still hers. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at her face, trying to memorize every line, every wrinkle, every quiet detail that told the story of a life well lived. Her hand felt smaller than I remembered, but it was the same hand that had once held mine when I was scared of thunder, the same hand that wiped my tears when I scraped my knee, the same hand that cooked my favorite meals when life felt too heavy to face. Now, that hand lay still in mine, fragile but alive, and I clung to it as though holding it tighter might keep her here a little longer. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the faint hum of rain outside the window. It was strange how peaceful it all seemed, how time slowed to a crawl in that small space between hope and goodbye. I wanted to say so much, everything I'd never said, everything I'd taken for granted, but the words stuck in my throat. I was afraid that if I spoke them, they'd become real, that somehow admitting goodbye would make it final. And then, the memories started to flood in. Not just flashes, but vivid scenes, as if time itself had opened a doorway back to the life we shared. I saw her standing by the kitchen window, flour on her cheek, laughing as she rolled dough and sang old hymns off-key. I heard her voice calling me in from the rain, scolding me for tracking mud across her clean floor, even though I knew she'd forgive me the moment I smiled. I remembered the way she'd kneel by her bed at night, whispering prayers when she thought I wasn't listening, prayers for me, always for me. She prayed for my safety, for my happiness, for my heart to never harden against the world. Tears filled my eyes before I even realized I was crying. I leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Her breathing was soft but shallow, like each breath was a battle she wasn't sure she could keep fighting. My voice trembled as I whispered, "Hey, Grandma, it's me." It felt strange, saying it out loud, like my voice didn't belong in that stillness. But I needed her to know I was there, that she wasn't alone, that she never would be. I talked for a while, my words spilling out in a rush, about my life, my work, the silly things I used to tell her on Sundays. I told her I missed her cooking, her laugh, even the way she nagged me about eating my vegetables. I told her she was my favorite person in the world, and that no matter what happened, that would never change. My throat tightened as I spoke, but I kept going, because silence suddenly felt unbearable. Finally, when I couldn't hold it in any longer, I said the words I'd been dreading to say, the words that felt like both a wound and a prayer. I took a deep breath, squeezed her hand gently, and whispered, "It's okay, Grandma. You can rest now. I love you." The words hung in the air, fragile and final. For a moment, nothing happened. The monitor kept beeping steadily, the rain kept tapping against the window, and I just sat there, waiting. Then, out of nowhere, it happened, so subtle I almost missed it. A single tear rolled down her cheek. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. I blinked, thinking maybe it was my imagination, a trick of the light. But no, it was real. The tear traced a slow path across her skin, catching the light before falling onto the pillow. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Grandma," I whispered, leaning closer, searching her face for any sign of movement. And then I saw it, the faintest curve at the corner of her lips. A smile. Small, fragile, but real. In that moment, everything stopped, the noise, the fear, the ache of loss that had been building inside me. There was only her and me, and that one simple truth between us. She heard me. I could feel it, not in my ears, but in my soul, the connection that had always been there between us, unspoken but unbreakable. It was as if she had reached across that invisible line between life and whatever lies beyond, just to let me know she wasn't gone yet. That she was listening. That she understood. My tears fell freely then, falling onto her hand, mixing with hers. I didn't care who saw. I didn't care what the machines said or what the doctors believed. In that moment, I knew something they didn't. Love doesn't need sound. It doesn't need words. It finds a way, through silence, through distance, even through the fading heartbeat of someone you can't bear to lose. And as that single tear dried on her cheek, I felt a strange peace settle over the room, soft, gentle, final. She had heard me. She always had. The monitor beeped once, a small, fragile sound that sliced through the stillness, and then it went flat. That sharp, continuous tone filled the room like a scream made of silence. For a second, I couldn't move. I just sat there, frozen, my hand still holding hers as if I could pull her back by sheer will. It was such a small sound, but it carried the weight of 1,000 goodbyes. The world around me blurred, the walls, the machines, the soft flicker of the ceiling lights, all of it faded until there was nothing left but that sound and the hollow ache in my chest. Then, everything erupted into motion. Nurses rushed in, their shoes squeaking against the tile, voices low but urgent. One of them leaned over the bed, checking the monitors, another adjusting the four. The doctor followed moments later, his expression focused but solemn. I could hear words, no pulse, time of death, prepare, but they all blurred together, muffled by the rushing in my ears. It felt like I was underwater, watching everything happen from a distance. I didn't cry right away. My body was too stunned to react, my mind refusing to accept what was right in front of me. I kept staring at her face, peaceful now, completely still. She looked like she was sleeping, like she'd wake up any second and ask why everyone was making such a fuss. For a fleeting moment, I almost believed she would. I almost said, "Come on, Grandma, you're scaring them." But deep down, I knew. She was gone. The nurse closest to me paused, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. Her eyes softened, filled with a kind of quiet compassion that only people who have seen this moment countless times can carry. "I think," she said softly, glancing at my grandmother's face, "she was waiting for something." Her voice cracked slightly, and for the first time, I saw tears in her eyes too. Another nurse nodded, her expression somewhere between confusion and awe. "She must have heard you," she murmured. "Right before," she smiled. Something inside me broke then. The tears came all at once, hot and uncontrollable, blurring everything in front of me. My throat tightened as I tried to speak, to say something, anything, but the only words that made it past the lump in my chest were, "She was waiting for me." Because I knew it was true. I felt it. That was who she'd always been, patient, loving, strong enough to hold on when the rest of the world let go. She had spent her whole life putting others before herself, making sure everyone she loved was okay before she ever thought about her own pain. Even in death, she did the same. She waited, for me, for my voice, for those last words she needed to hear. I remembered something she once told me when I was a child, after my mother died. I had asked her how she stayed so strong, how she could still smile when everything hurt. She placed a hand on my chest and said, "Strength isn't about never breaking, Danny. It's about holding on long enough to say goodbye the right way." I never understood it until that moment. The doctor touched my arm gently, his voice low and respectful. "We did everything we could," he said. I nodded, not out of understanding, but because there was nothing left to say. They began to step back, giving me space. The room grew quiet again, that eerie kind of quiet that feels too big for its walls. I leaned forward and rested my forehead against her hand. It was already cooling, but I didn't let go. I didn't want to. My tears fell onto her skin, mixing with the faint traces of her perfume, that soft, comforting scent of lavender and soap that always clung to her clothes. "She waited for me," I whispered again, my voice breaking. "You did, didn't you?" And though she couldn't answer, I could almost hear her, not in words, but in that deep, familiar way her presence always spoke. A memory, a feeling, a warmth that lingered even in the stillness. I sat there for what felt like hours, long after the nurses left the room, long after the monitor had gone quiet. I thought about all the times she'd been my anchor, the one constant thing in a world that never stopped changing. And now, even in leaving, she had given me one final gift, the chance to say goodbye, the chance to be there when she took her last breath, the chance to tell her I loved her one more time. The rain outside began to ease, turning from a storm into a soft drizzle. Through the window, I could see the faint glow of sunrise beginning to break through the clouds. I took it as a sign, a small whisper from her saying, "Don't cry too long, my boy. Morning always comes." And so I sat there, holding her hand, letting the tears fall until they turned into quiet smiles. Because she hadn't left me alone. Not really. She'd just gone ahead, waiting, like she always did, for me to catch up someday. I walked out of that hospital with an empty heart, yet somehow, I wasn't broken. The air outside was cold, the kind that bites softly at your skin, but it felt cleaner, freer, like the world had taken a long breath after holding it for too long. The rain had stopped, and the streets shimmered under the dull orange glow of the streetlights. I could still hear the echo of that flat line in my ears, that long, unbroken sound that meant an entire chapter of my life had ended. But as strange as it sounds, I didn't feel crushed. The pain was real, sharp and heavy, but there was something else underneath it, something calm, something peaceful. I didn't rush to the car. I just stood there under the hospital awning, watching drops of water slide off the edge of the roof. My hands were still trembling, and I could feel the warmth of her hand lingering on my skin, like her touch hadn't quite let go yet. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just breathed, slowly, deeply, because I was afraid that if I took another step, I'd leave her behind. But then, in that quiet space between one heartbeat and the next, I felt it. Not physically, but deep inside me, that presence, that warmth that had followed me my whole life. I realized then that she wasn't gone. Not really. She just went home before me. It was something she used to say whenever I'd leave her house after a visit. "Don't stay away too long, my boy," she'd call out from the porch, waving that worn towel she always carried. "This is still your home." And I'd laugh, telling her she'd get tired of me one day. She never did. Now, as I stood in the soft drizzle, I could almost hear her voice again, not as a memory, but as something alive, echoing gently in the back of my mind. "Don't cry, my boy," she said, her voice calm, the same tone she used when I was little and scraped my knees. "You made me proud." Those words wrapped around me like a blanket. For the first time since I walked into that hospital, I felt my chest loosen. I let out a shaky laugh, the kind that comes when sadness and gratitude mix into something unexplainable. My tears were still falling, but they didn't hurt anymore. They felt cleansing. Like every tear carried away a little bit of the heaviness. I started walking slowly toward the parking lot. The world felt different, quieter, yes, but also brighter somehow. Every sound seemed softer, every color gentler. The wet pavement glistened like glass, reflecting the sky that was slowly breaking open with the first hints of dawn. It struck me that even after the darkest night, the sun still finds its way back. Maybe that's what Grandma was, my sunrise. As I walked, I thought about all the lessons she'd left me. The way she taught me to see beauty in simple things, in morning tea, in laughter shared over old stories, in forgiveness. I realized that the strength I had in that moment was hers. She had planted it in me a long time ago, in every word, every prayer, every act of love that built me into the man I was. She had prepared me for this goodbye, even when I didn't see it coming. By the time I reached my car, the sky had turned a pale blue, and a thin line of gold peeked over the horizon. I leaned against the door, looking up at that first light, and for a moment, I imagined her there, young again, free from pain, standing in that light and smiling down at me. It wasn't a sad image. It felt right. Like she was exactly where she was meant to be. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'll be okay, Grandma." The words came out steady, surprising even me. I could almost feel her smile in response, the same soft curve of her lips that had comforted me since childhood. For the first time, I smiled through my tears. Not because the pain was gone, but because I understood it. It was proof of love. Real love doesn't disappear when someone dies, it just changes shape. It becomes memory, presence, faith. It lingers in the way you cook their favorite meal, in the way you laugh at something they once said, in the way you find strength in the smallest moments. As I drove home, the city slowly waking up around me, I felt a quiet peace settle in my chest. It wasn't joy exactly, but it was close, something softer, something eternal. I knew that no matter how far I went, she'd always be with me, in every word I spoke, in every kindness I gave, in every heartbeat that kept time with hers. She wasn't gone. She just went home before me. And one day, when my own time comes, I know she'll be there, waiting, patient as ever, smiling that same proud, gentle smile, and saying, "Welcome home, my boy. You made it." Some people think love ends when someone dies, but I know now that isn't true. Love doesn't fade into the dark, it doesn't vanish with the sound of a flatline or disappear with the closing of a hospital door. It simply changes its form. It becomes quieter, softer, something you feel instead of touch, something that lives in the spaces between memories and moments. It lingers, like a scent that never quite leaves a room, like a song that hums gently long after the last note has been played. In the days that followed, I kept expecting to wake up and hear her voice again. I'd pick up my phone on Sunday evenings, my thumb hovering over her contact like a habit I hadn't learned to break. Sometimes I'd almost press call, forgetting that she wouldn't answer. But then I'd catch myself smiling instead of crying, because in some strange way, I could hear her anyway. That familiar, steady warmth of her voice whispering from somewhere deep inside me, not in words, but in the feeling she always left behind, calm, patient, full of love. I began to notice her everywhere. In the way the sunlight hit the kitchen window in the morning, golden and soft, just the way it used to when we made breakfast together. In the scent of rain after a storm, reminding me of those afternoons we sat on the porch, her telling stories that never seemed to end. Even in my own habits, the way I'd hum while cooking, the way I'd whisper a small prayer before bed, I realized I had become an echo of her. Every small thing she taught me had rooted itself into who I was, quietly shaping the person I became. That's the thing about love, it doesn't die with the person who carried it. It passes on, like light through stained glass, changing shape but never losing its glow. It lives in the choices we make, the kindness we offer, the laughter we share. She may no longer be here to answer my calls, but she's in every word I speak with gentleness, every time I pause to be grateful, every time I face something hard and hear her voice reminding me, "You're stronger than you think." There are moments when I still feel the ache, that hollow ache that grief leaves behind, like a shadow that never completely disappears. But even that pain has softened, reshaped into something meaningful. It's become a reminder that I was lucky enough to love someone so deeply that losing them hurt this much. That kind of love doesn't vanish, it becomes part of you, stitched into the rhythm of your heartbeat. Sometimes at night, when the world is quiet and the city hums softly outside my window, I sit and listen. And if I listen closely enough, I swear I can still hear her, not in sound, but in spirit. A faint whisper, a soft echo that brushes against the edges of silence, "I'm proud of you, my boy." It's not loud, not even clear, but it's there. And that's enough. People say goodbye in their own ways. Some with words, some with silence, and some with a single tear that says everything words never could. Grandma said goodbye the only way she knew how, through love. Through waiting for me to speak, through holding on just long enough to hear my voice, through smiling one last time so I'd know she heard me. That was her gift to me, her final act of love. Now, when I think of her, I don't just see the woman in the hospital bed. I see the woman who raised me, who danced in the kitchen, who laughed until she coughed, who prayed over me every night. I see her as she was, alive, full of light, and forever part of me. And even though the world feels different without her, I know she's still here, in every quiet corner of my heart. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It lingers in the quiet moments, in every lesson, in every memory that refuses to fade. It's in the warmth of a hug you can no longer feel, in the laughter that echoes long after it's gone, in the tears that fall not out of sorrow, but gratitude. Because love, real love, never leaves. It just finds new ways to stay. And if you listen closely, really listen, you'll hear it too, that soft whisper of someone you've loved saying your name, reminding you they're still with you, just in a different way. If this story touched your heart, leave a red heart in the comments. Have you ever felt someone you love say goodbye in their own way? Subscribe to CineVerse for more stories that remind us. Even goodbyes can be filled with love.